So that's the break-even point for the insurance company. If they charge less than that, they'll lose money. If they charge more than that, they should make money, barring some sort of widespread catastrophe that causes a large number of people to have accidents all at once. So, given this concept of substitution, let's return back to our hypothetical case study here. And we can say, all right, let's suppose that we can estimate some average losses and likelihoods based on some studies of similar organizations. So you say, all right, there's performance problems, we're testing for performance, and organizations like ours, when they have performance problems, they suffer a $100,000 average loss and a 10% likelihood. Functional problems, and you say that's $5,000 the average loss at a 50% likelihood. Security problems, $250,000, average loss of 5% likelihood. Other kinds of problems, a $10,000 average loss at a 10% likelihood. These are just made-up numbers to illustrate the concept here. So the expected payouts then would be 0.1 times 100,000. That's the expected payout for performance problems. 0.5 times 250,000. That's expected payout for security. You got 0.05 times 10,000. That's the expected payouts for functional and so forth. So we come up with 26,000 as our value. Now, I just want to. This is hypothetical, of course, and I want to point out, that your average costs and likelihoods are things that you're going to probably pull off the internet and do some research on. It's based on a pretty small sample of projects, and so this is not a high confidence number. This is really kind of a finger in the air estimate of this. Also, some organizations are less risk averse than others. Some small aggressive startups often are like, well, from great risks come great rewards. So they might not really be terribly concerned about this particular value, more concerned about the bug finding value. I also want to point out that unlike insurance, testers are not going to make the project team whole. Basically, the difference in insurance is a form of risk mitigation or risk management by transference. You're transferring the costs of a problem onto somebody else who agrees to accept it. Testing manages risk through mitigation, basically by taking steps prior to release that are going to reduce the likelihood and or impact of problems after release. So it's a different kind of risk mitigation, but it's still risk mitigation nonetheless. Okay, so again, this is no increased investment here because this testing is already happening. So we're still at an $82,500. So we say that there's basically an additional $26,000 worth of quote-unquote insurance value here, which I've shown here. And so I'm going to add that along with the $32,500 as the benefit. And so again, notice that relatively speaking, this insurance value, the risk mitigation is pretty small relative to the defect detecting value. So that was true also of the non-must-fix bugs that were found. Notice that the contribution was pretty small. And this actually has an important practical lesson for you. One of the things that you might want to do if you're going to go off and quantify the value of your testing is you might want to just use cost of quality rather than trying to do this, calculate some of these other values, because they are going to be relatively smaller contributors, and they are also, the techniques for measuring the value is less well established, so it might damage the credibility of your business case. So, be aware of these things, and you can certainly mention them as values, but I'd say that probably if you're going to just try to take a real simple approach, just focus on measuring the cost of quality and leave it at that, and just mention that these other things are also there. But since we're on this topic, let's look at the last of the four things that I mentioned, measurable value, which is the testing information as a guide to project success. So going back to our friend Capers-Jones here, estimating software costs, that he identifies poor project tracking as one of the key causes of project failure. So certainly accurate, credible, timely testing metrics would be part of good project information tracking. So if you say medium-sized project, according to Jones's figures, good project tracking will reduce the risk of project failure from 40% to 20%. Assuming the testing is kind of half of the project management information picture, then you can say, okay, 10% of that is the value to the project from testing itself. So let's take a look at what that would mean. Now, I want to point something out here, that the risk of project failure tends to vary quite a bit, as you'll see if you look at his book, Estimating Software Costs. So the value of the information from testing goes up dramatically as the project gets large and complex. Okay, so let's assume that basically we've got a medium-sized project. We're going to reduce the risk through the information generated by testing at 10%. Let's assume that the project cost is the only value that's at risk, which is basically meaning we're ignoring the opportunity cost associated with a project failure. And say, well, if the project fails, we lose all the money that we spent on the project, which is certainly true. So we're going to take the testing budget, the development budget, which are collectively $330,000, and we take 10% of that, so that's the value of the tracking information. So, and take that $33,000 and throw that in the mix here. So I've done that down here. So again, a relatively small incremental increase across these other three values. We've captured less than $100,000 as compared to $500,000 plus of benefit from just the bug tracking. So that's fairly typical that the bug tracking value is going to be the most significant of the values. But still, worth keeping in mind that there is some significant value associated with these other areas outside of bug detection. Now, our overall percentage return on investment here you see is a 738%. You might say, okay, well, how's that compared to the real world? Fairly typical number is 800%. There does tend to be tremendous variation in this when we measure it. And we've seen it, down in the 30-40% range, as low as, and as high as in the 3,200% range. So it does vary quite a bit. 800 is pretty typical. So this, while a hypothetical case, is not unusual in terms of the actual number that we see. But, hypotheticals are all well and good. Let's look at an actual case study. Now, this is from a project that my colleagues and I did a few years ago. Let me just try to find this. Shoot. Oops. Bear with me for just one moment here. We're gonna find this spreadsheet and get it open. Okay, yeah. Now, yeah. All right. So you should now see, refreshing on your screen, a spreadsheet. This, by the way, is described in great detail in an article. So it's out on the on the basic library or the articles page, one of the two, as a case study in calculating return on investment of testing, and this is described here. So let me walk you through the calculation of the return on investment just for